Hey, welcome to Next Level Method Podcast. I'm Richard Ryerson.
And I'm Matt Lilly.
And we're here to help you take your life to the next level. Let's get started. Oh, what an exciting guest today, Cassandra Worthy. Right?
Amazing.
She's a chemical engineer by trade.
Right.
Worked in a large Fortune 50 company, I think she said in her TED Talk. Mm-hmm. She never said what the company was, but she worked there for a long time, but then went through this acquisition.
Right.
This, and huge change in her world that really disrupted her plans of retiring with this company. And she went through all those emotions of fear, anger, concern, everything, and then she took that moment and harnessed it, and turned it into good. And that's really what she's about, right? She's a consultant. She's a speaker. She teaches us how to harness the anxiety, which we've talked about before. I'm using the language of David Emerald that you and I are such big fans of.
Yeah.
But how to harness anxiety, how to acknowledge our emotions, the fear, the anger, all that stuff, and not run away from it, sit with it, and use it as a barometer for positive change. That's what I got out of the conversation. What did you think?
I agree 110%. It's like, we're all going to have challenges that hit us. Sometimes we call them problems, sometimes we call them challenges, but we're all going to have challenges. We always have change. That's the one constant in life. I mean, that's something I tell myself all the time. The one constant in life is change. So am I going to learn to be a good, if I'm rowing the boat, I just got to learn to row the boat on the change or the water of change, right? But ultimately, I think that's what she was doing through her book, Change Enthusiasm, is kind of how to navigate that, right? And not pretend like you're not rowing against or rowing upstream or what. I mean, being real with your emotion, being real with where you're at. And to your point, using that as a barometer for, now what am I going to do with that, right? Am I going to let it define me and tear me down, or am I going to use that to allow me, as I like to say, the jet fuel to drive me forward, right? To propel me into my future. And certainly, she did it through, I think we both appreciated she did it through actual life experience. This isn't theoretical. She was like, she wrote the book because she's done it. And then she saw so many other people struggling with change. And that's what propelled her to go into the space. So yeah, when you look at her energy and you look at her vibe, I'm not thinking chemical engineer. I'll just be honest with you, right? When I say the word chemical engineer, that's not what I get in my picture in my head. A lot more. She's very animated and she's a very good speaker, right? She's just very outgoing.
And it feeds into the pillars of Next Level Method, particularly the one about purpose. I think for me, purpose and what's your superpower. And again, to find your purpose and to find your superpower, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Which I think her message really is about. Yeah. And how do we recognize those moments, take the pause? We talked about that a lot in the conversation. And I love what she said about the seeds of trust, right? And there's a lot of trusting involved in this, a lot of faith, if you will, faith in the journey, not knowing how it's going to end, but just trusting that when you're in this moment, which I think is so hard to do, when you're in that moment, taking that pause and going, okay, what is this here to teach me?
Right.
Where can I go with this? And not reacting to the moment and then
not letting it spiral down. Right.
She talked about that a lot. Spiral down. Anyway, I love this conversation. Really good.
Great guest. I hope we have her on again. She's a lot of value to get out of today's podcast.
Yeah. Go check us out, nextlevelmethod.com, to learn more and sign up for our services and for our special bonuses. You can learn more at the website, nextlevelmethod.com. Well, Cassandra, man, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I so appreciate it.
What I like about what you talk about is when we look at our pillars here at Next Level Method, and one of them is purpose and what is your superpower and how does that apply? And I think your message and what you're teaching relates to that deeply, because something I love, and I've talked to many guests and tried to apply in my personal life, is this: when I look at you and I look at your message, it's about harnessing anxiety and not ignoring those emotions, and use those for fuel for your purpose, right? Am I hitting the nail on the head there?
You're hitting it. You got it. Yeah.
So how did you come about to that? How did you come to this awakening of not ignoring, because I think a lot of times we're taught to ignore the anxiety or look at anxiety as weaknesses.
Right.
And that's not what you're telling us. You're telling us to embrace that with all your might and use that to fuel your next step. How did you get there?
Yeah, well, let me first tell you that I am probably the biggest student of what I teach. And that, I mean, you've heard that, right? We teach the lessons we most need to learn.
Right.
And I have been one, just as an individual, who has a propensity to numbing out, ignoring what I deem, and a lot of us deem these negative emotions, like anxiety, like anger, like frustration, and these emotions that typically bubble up when we're going through big change, big transformation, big disruption, that kind of change that I say feels like slaps you across the face and puts you on the ground when those emotions pop up. But this mindset really came from me as a means to grow through change myself. So I'm a chemical engineer by trade, and I spent about 15 years working in more traditional roles of corporate America. And within that 15 years, I spent some time working in acquisitions. And for those of you who have experienced acquisitions, that's the kind of change that feels like it could slap you across the face and you're lying on the ground looking up at the ceiling, right?
Very scary, yeah.
So I experienced that pretty young in my career, and I experienced those emotions, that feeling of frustration, that feeling of anger, that us versus them kind of culture dynamics going through an acquisition, feeling every day like I just wanted to quit, like I wanted to get up, walk out the door, and never come back. But it was through cultivating this mindset that I've now coined change enthusiasm, and recognizing that these emotions, this is energy.
Yeah.
And I'm going to trust that it's here to serve me. They're here for a reason, right? They exist among all of us. I say that emotion is this, universal language, energy that flows through all of us, and we have an infinite well of it. So why not use it? And by thinking of it in that way, I was able to step into this big moment of opportunity going through those acquisitions. Okay, I'm in a moment of growth. I'm in a moment to learn about myself, learn about this business, learn about going through an acquisition. So how can I choose to milk this opportunity for all it's worth? And so that's what I did, going through these acquisitions, recognizing my signal emotions, this anxiety, this frustration, this anger, as gifts, as invitations, welcoming me into opportunities to grow and learn. And through practicing this mindset, this change enthusiasm in my own life, I was able to take my career in places that I'd never dreamed.
Yeah.
And recognize that those big disruptions that blind you and knock you on the ground are really happening not to you, but for you, to serve your evolution and challenge you and allow you to grow and stretch and become better. And so now I'm so grateful to share this mindset that really I cultivated so that I could survive and thrive and grow through change and share it with millions all over the world.
I absolutely love that. I agree with you 100%. I mean, Matt, did I ever tell you, I was a pilot in the Marine Corps. I got hired by American Airlines in 2001, and long story short, finished my training on September 8th, 2001, and September 11th was my first day. And I had I had it all set out in I was going to be an airline pilot, right? And I was going to retire millionaire at 60. I was going to do all these things, right? Right. And then 9/11 happened, and all of it was taken, I just remember that gut punch. The worst thing that happened to me is I lost my job. I don't try to equate the tragedy of 9/11 with, it's all about me. It's not. But but my plan was thwarted, right? Because of those events. Much like probably people felt during this year, during COVID and everything else, and during your acquisition, like you're talking about. But that happens all the time, right? And you see those people who pull themselves out of the mud, and I call these out of these mud moments, are the ones that embrace that kind of, and they harness that anxiety. They use those emotions for fuel. I know it took me a long time to do that, but I look back now with some wisdom and some marination on the time. That's what I did. I mean, once I got through the shock and the fear, I kind of just said, okay, you know what? What is this teaching me? I remember saying that to myself at one time. What is this teaching me? I don't know. Did you have an experience like that?
Yeah,
Matt?
well, ongoing. I think to your point, it's ongoing. These emotions we're emotional creatures, right? We always have emotion coming through us all the time. And I think that's the really differentiator between having a life that's purposeful and we feel some sense of accomplishment, we feel some sense of success, is when we can harness that and use it for positive change or use it for positivity versus letting it beat us up, right? Because I've also had those 3 a.m., wake up at 3 a.m. feeling anxiety and apprehension and what should I do about this? Once in a while I still have those nights where you wake up and you're just like, what should I do with this? And that's all emotion too. So I think, but it's the predominantly, how do we, and I think we're going to talk about that today. How do we lean into what we're talking about here with this change enthusiasm? How do we do that? How does it work?
Yeah. How do we get comfortable being uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. And what I also want to not negate, right, is the importance of recognizing those what we deem negative emotions.
Mm-hmm.
In no way, when I talk about that teach change enthusiasm, people are always like, don't talk to me. All right, I'm struggling right now. I don't want to hear your sugary sweet, always be positive, rah, rah, rah mess. Right. But this is not what it's about. It's about acknowledging and allowing those signal emotions. So if you're struggling, if you're feeling fear, if you're feeling anxiety, that's okay. Allow that feeling to exist. Grant yourself grace to sit with those emotions. But the mindset is about trusting that they're there to serve you.
Yeah.
That if you're feeling them, you're in this opportunity to grow and to learn. And when you're ready to get about the business of maximizing that opportunity, you then make that choice and you step into the practice of this mindset. But in no way do I want folks to walk away thinking this is just a really sugary sweet, positive outlook on all change. Yeah, it sucks, but get over it. That's not what this is about. It's about just acknowledging and recognizing those signal emotions, being in tune with how that energy flows through you so that you can recognize them and then look to transform that energy into that fuel for growth.
Yeah, you have to go through it, right? It's like you make it worse when you ignore it, and you're right. And if you try to sugarcoat it, and that's what I love about your stuff, Cassandra, is because it's a breath of fresh air. Because if you look at the vast majority of the material or the coaches or the consultants that are telling you to get through these kind of change dynamics, they don't really embrace that. They try to say, hey, just, the me you see is the me you're going to be, right? So just tell yourself and like you ignore the feelings almost. Not all of them are like that, but it seems like the vast majority of the stuff that I come across is like
not really focused on emotion, right?
Not focused on how do you said it, acknowledging it but trusting. I like what you said, trusting that this is going to serve you, right? You got to go through the pain. Yeah. You got to go through the grief. You got to go through the fear, right?
Yeah, so often in my work, and you've probably heard it before, but you've got leadership, and I've experienced it myself, that when going through a big disruption, a big growth challenge, big transition, transformation, they admit this is going to be tough. Okay, this is going to be hard, but then it's like this, suck it up, bear it, grit it, and just get through it because we have to. Not really giving employees in the workforce a means, a conduit, the tools to actually work through those emotions, recognizing them as energetic fuel. It's more of a glazed over, it's going to be tough, but okay, you deal with that outside of the work hours. When you come in here, you need to go forward with this change. But this is about recognizing, acknowledging, and then using that infinite resource of emotion to fuel your transformation journey, transforming that anxiety into anticipation, right? And really employing that energy throughout the workforce.
Your book, Change Enthusiasm, is it more for the individual to help them navigate through something like that? Or is it, and is it a book about culture? Meaning if I have a business, can I use this book too to help kind of plant the seeds of the culture so that we can deal with the change? Does that make sense?
So it does. And I will say that the book is predominantly focused at the individual, right? So my message, though I work with clients with, large organizations, the message is for the individual that's going through the change, experiencing the change, as well as those leading through the change. Mm-hmm. So there's actually a section in the book that's the advanced application that's all about those who are leading or influencing change. And what are those softer skills that are so necessary when you have an organization feeling their signal emotions, right? When the tensions are high, when you're going through a lot of change, what do you need to be flexing from a skill set standpoint to leverage and inspire that organization getting those signal emotions? But again, it's really focused on the individual, whether you're experiencing, executing, or leading big change and transformation.
God, there's so much to explore there. Where do you want to dive in? What's your because I love what do I do as a leader part, but I guess I'm interested too as an individual. What do we do? Exactly,
because and as we dive into the subject, even though this is kind of framed around kind of more of the corporate or business structure, really this applies. I'm assuming this applies really everywhere in your life, because it doesn't matter if you're working for a company. A good example is that you brought up with COVID. That affected us all to some degree in some manner. So we had to shift, we had to change, we had to morph, we had to change some of our mindset. And you saw people that didn't do well, and you saw people that thrived during that process. So really change happens all the time. Now, not huge change all the time, but there's change happening all the time. So really, I think is it accurate to say if you can figure out how to kind of use this change enthusiasm, you really apply that broad stroke across your life, not just at work, right?
Across your life, yes, anywhere that you experience emotion,
right?
Any situation where you've got frustration or anger, change enthusiasm applies.
Right. Okay, good.
And I'm a huge proponent, and I've spoken about it on several other podcasts as well as one that I'm leading myself. This idea of work-life balance, I think is quickly becoming obsolete.
Right.
And I'm very much so about work-life integration.
Yeah.
Right? How the work that you do is a part of having a fulfilled, healthy life. And it's not about what you experience at your work as one self and then outside of work as another self. So that just speaks to the fact that change enthusiasm is something that you practice in a fulfilled and an enriching life, no matter what aspect of the life you're talking about.
Yeah.
So what's that look like for you, I guess? Because I always love to learn from other people. I think that's how I learn fastest, is literally like if I want to learn something, I just go find somebody. I wanted to learn about doing podcasts, and I found Richard, right? It was like, wow, there's somebody in our town that's done like a ton of this. They're like, they're in the top 0.5% of all podcasters. All this, I was like, cool. So we just went to lunch. That's how I started learning about podcasting. So
you're a smart guy, man. I like it. Richard's good.
Right.
That's a good resource.
I like to be efficient, right? That's why we have you on the show. It's like, how do we master this stuff, or at least learn about it faster? So in your own life, how does that show up? I guess kind of that, because now you got me on kind of that thing, is like this, what you've coined is this work-life integration. What's that look like? How's that work?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of, like I said, I am the greatest student of what I teach, of change enthusiasm. And I've never had to practice this more than in the past 18 months.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And I actually wrote my book during the pandemic. So I landed my publishing deal with Hay House in March of 2020. Right as
it's starting.
COVID-19 was putting a chokehold on all communities all around the world. And so I was literally getting up every day and writing the lessons and the concepts that I had to put into practice in order to turn my business around.
Yeah.
So for me, like in March, like those last 2 weeks and also going into April, the best that I could do is get up, go check how many events had been canceled, how many had been rescheduled, look at how my revenue was continuing to dwindle, and then go get on the couch and binge Netflix. That's the best I could do for about 2 or 3 weeks. That's all that I could do. But I recognize, obviously, in that darkness, that wait a minute, I created a mindset that enables you to use this energy, this exact energy that I'm feeling, to fuel growth. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to give myself some grace. For the next few days, I'm going to keep doing this. But then I'm going to step into this opportunity that I have to grow. And so what I did was recognize that this message that I bring was still very relevant, if not more so, in the face of the pandemic. And I knew that my clients were going to need this message into the coming months. So I started thinking, how can I pivot and still share this message? So I started learning about camera setup. I started learning about virtual studios. I reconfigured my home office into a home studio. I started doing a listening tour with my past clients, just listening. What are you going through? What does help look like? Can I do a brainstorm with you? Really not even looking to build revenue, really just looking to be there to my client base. And then over the next several weeks, again, practicing the mindset. This is an opportunity. Here's some options I have. I can reach out to some speakers that I see are already starting to do virtual. I could go over here and take a class and kind of learn how to do a virtual, home studio setup, and making these choices just consistently day after day. And I was able to turn my business around and honestly reach greater levels of revenue and touching more lives around the world by pivoting into virtual.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a practice, right? Every day. There were days when I woke up and saw, good gracious, 14 cancellations came through. And there's a point where it looked like my revenue outlook for 2020 was down to 0.
Right.
And so of course that's panic, that's anger, that's frustration.
Sure.
But I leveraged that energy, transformed it through the power of choice to learn, to pivot, and get into this virtual space.
So many great things you said there. And I think, just to reemphasize, and we've talked about this before with David Emerald stuff and everything, we're always at a choice. Creators are always at a choice. You can never, no one can ever take that away from you, no matter what is happening. And I think that's what I got out of out of your story there, Cassandra. It's so powerful.
And know that, when you're sitting in that seat of power with choice, it can be very daunting.
Yes.
It can be very overwhelming.
Yes.
And I was sitting in that seat many, many days of last year, honestly, only being able to make one small choice, sending one email to a speaker that I saw was doing a virtual engagement, just that one email. And that was the one choice that I made for the day. So no matter what that choice looks like, no matter how big or small, know that you're taking steps in your evolution. You're slowly learning, slowly growing, and just trust that process.
Yeah, it's hard, but you're right. It's the baby steps,
right?
The thing we've talked about in the past, and like the breakthrough is never going to happen. That's what I think is important, is that the breakthrough, whatever that breakthrough looks like, and you don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know when it's going to happen, but it will never happen if you don't intentionally do something and make a choice, right? If you just sit there. Yeah.
And I invite the folks, my practicing change enthusiasts around the world, to leverage what I call seeds of trust, to anchor them in those moments where there's a bit of overwhelm. And those seeds of trust are thinking back to times when you experience devastation, where you experience tremendous change, tremendous disruption, and something good came from it.
Right.
Whether a new connection, a new position, something that you learned that you never thought you'd be able to learn. Just use those as seeds to say, you know what, I've been through difficult times before, and something really good came out of that. So I'm going to trust something good is in store for me now. I'm getting these signaling emotions. They're here for a reason. They're signaling me into something else that's good going to happen, and I just need to trust this journey.
Yeah, I love that. And that it's all about perspective, right? When you can do that.
Yes.
And then I think even looking outside, like somebody's been through this before.
Right.
Who is it, and what did they do, and what did they learn? I've done that in the past. Like, okay, come on, I can't be the only person on the planet that's feeling this way or experienced this, and looking for that perspective seems to help.
And I think that's the trap we fall into, right? I think that's why people do fall into depression or fall into funks for long periods of time, is because they do think that it feels like, and I know a lot of times in my life, it feels like I'm the only one in that moment going through that on the face of the earth. It's like, this is only happening to me. So we kind of take on that victim victim persona and say, woe is me because I'm the only one experiencing it. And that's not true. That's never true. One, people, typically there's always somebody that's got stuff much worse than I do. And second of all, there's people that have been through the exact same thing. And it's my choice at that point is, do I want to reach out to people that have been through that to learn, or to even just get support, somebody to hear me? I mean, sometimes for me, the choice may be just, hey, I've got 4 or 5 people here I can call that could at least say, hey, I'll listen. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Yeah. That makes sense, or I've been through something similar, or sorry, you're experiencing that right now, but they'll at least listen, right? Yeah. And sometimes for me, that is just having somebody hear me out is a choice.
Huge.
It always goes back to
in that vein, Richard, I'm so curious, what do you think your biggest lesson was in your experience in September 9/11?
Oh, wow.
With the transition and what you thought was going to be happening that day, and then what didn't. What was your greatest lesson in that experience?
Well, initially there was a lot of gratitude because there was a lot of loss, and so I just remember wanting to be home and be and so just the perspective of like nothing's really that important except my family.
Right.
Perfect.
But in the long term, as it went out, the mindset was a shift from. It was panic. I remember thinking, "Oh my God, all I know how to do is fly airplanes." I remember thinking that one day. What am I going to do? Because nobody is hiring pilots anymore. And my mindset was, I am a pilot. I identified as a pilot. I'm going to be a pilot. Now there's no pilots needed.
Right.
So,
right.
Or at least I wasn't needed. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so I guess the biggest lesson learned was kind of along what you're saying, is that as I gave myself grace and kind of the freedom and permission to kind of acknowledge the victimization of what has happened,
right?
But don't fall into victimhood. And I just started doing something, and I just said, a lot of it was out of necessity. I had to put food on the table for the kids and the wife, but
sure. Yeah.
But as I started doing things and taking small bit, not knowing where it's going to go, just starting to kind of, I guess the lesson was I started listening to what I was drawn to. And I would just start doing things, and I didn't have a playbook. I just said, I'm gonna follow what I'm drawn to. like intuition and try things. And that was the big lesson that I learned. And then and went from a mindset of like, oh my God, all I know how to do is fly airplanes, to now is like, there's so many things I want to do, and there's so many things I can do, right? And so,
oh my gosh, what a lesson!
Yeah,
what a lesson! So. Golly, I hope everybody's learned that lesson. I tell you, I have always been a very curious person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
me too. When I was a kid, I was the one asking all the questions, annoying the mess out of my parents. But which is why I gravitated towards science and math, right? Because they gave me the tools to answer a lot of these questions, these mysteries of life. But yeah, I've always been curious. But it wasn't until probably about 6 or 7 years ago that I really started to listen to my intuition in earnest and really started to walk that path, following those curiosities of what sharing my natural talents, gifts, and experience with the world in a much bigger way than leading organizations in corporate, what that would look like. And it's through that lesson that you learned that I have actually grown into this business, cultivated this business, and now I'm able to walk on purpose each and every day by following this whisper, right? That intuition. So important.
I think my curiosity took over and I listened to it. That's what you just said is exactly what happened to me. Is I listened to my because and when I was watching your TED, it's kind of the same thing with you. Is that you graduated college, you got this chemical engineering job at this great organization that you loved and the well-known large corporation. I think you identified with that and you were proud of that. And like, I was a chemical engineer at this major. Like, you see these products in your house? Yeah, I work at that place, right? I mean, that was probably you, right? Yeah. Right. And when
I bragged a lot.
Exactly, right?
My friends and my family. Right? I like that shampoo. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, right. But then when it's taken away from you, that's the same thing with me. Like, I wanted you to know that I was a pilot. I wanted you to know I worked at American Airlines, And then when it's taken away from you, and I think that's the big lie that all of us are kind of trapped in, that we put our self-worth and our identity in two things: what we accomplish and what other people think of us. And I think you were guilty of that. I was guilty of that. And you've probably been guilty of that too. And then when it's taken away from you, then you're kind of forced to do what happened to us. Right. And then, that's the blessing behind kind of the dramatic event or the splat moment or whatever you want to call it. Right. I don't know. I'm kind of just spitballing here.
I'm a huge believer in the journey of our authentic success.
Yeah.
And getting away from this paradigm of success being this big shiny box that's out here that other people have curated, like nice homes, big cars, a lot of money, power, blah, blah, blah. But curating our own success that we hold right here and that we fill that box of what defines our success. And I have found that I live fulfilled every day because I know I hold that box of authentic success.
Yeah, I love that.
I think every day I achieve that authentic success, and it's up to me to define it and then achieve it. And honestly, the core of it for me is in a feeling, right? A feeling of fulfillment, a feeling of joy. If I have that in my day, then I'm successful.
I love that. Absolutely love that.
This just brought up this story. I was flying through Dallas, I don't know, maybe a decade or more ago. And at the time I was traveling quite a bit. And my kind of thing to myself is that I'm traveling all the time, but every time I'm in the airport, I'm going to get my shoes shined, right? Once in a while, like not all every day, but I get my shoes, and it was just like relaxing. It was basically like a massage for me. It's like just getting my shoes shined, just having somebody shine my shoes. It's just like, because I'm wearing my shoes, right? There's a whole thing to it, right? If you got to get a really good shoe shine person. And so I was there and I was talking, I would always talk to the shoe shine people. And so I was sitting there and I was talking to him, and this guy was just shining my shoes, and we were talking about stuff, and he was talking about his grandkids and his life and how long he'd lived in Dallas and all this, how he'd had such a wonderful life. And then all of a sudden he said, burden or blessing, it's up to me. And I went, and in my head, I just remember going, I said, what? And he said, well, it's really up to me to choose if it's a burden or blessing. He said, things happen to us in life. He said, I've had this happen. I've had this happen. He said, but really for me, I get to choose, is it a burden or is it a blessing? And I think that's what you're talking about, right? It's that mindset of it's happening for me. As you've said, it's happening for me, not to me. And how do I frame it, right?
Exactly the lesson. Yeah. And it mirrors the best advice I ever got in my life, which was actually, I think, the seed that grew change enthusiasm. And it was from a mentor. It's when I was struggling going through an acquisition. I was venting to her. I was saying everything short of, listen, fire my manager, fire these other 7 people that I'm struggling with.
Right.
And she was like, Cassandra, I'm going to offer you some advice. You can either get bitter or you can get better.
Right.
It's your choice. It's your choice.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was those words that put me on this trajectory of cultivating this mindset and sitting in that seat of choice. It is my choice on how I experience life. It is my choice. And I'm going to step into that power.
Yeah. And it's trusting. Again, going back to the trust, like, I don't know how this is going. You know, and I think that's what great leaders do, in both in individual and organizations. They don't know how it's going to happen. They just know it's going to happen, if that makes sense. And it's trust, it's faith. I'm curious about spirituality, belief in a higher power. How important is that to you in your own change enthusiasm? Do you talk about that?
Hugely.
Yeah.
Hugely. So when I shared what I do with my partner, when we met, she was like, "This is mindfulness."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
really
yes, yeah, totally.
Mindfulness and centering into the business landscape, and I said,
right.
"Shh." But yes,
That's right.
that is what I'm doing. Yeah, it's hugely important. And if you think about, change enthusiasm, enthusiast, the origin of that word, enthusiast is one who is inspired from within, and it's actually divinely inspired.
Yeah.
That's kind of the background of definition of enthusiast. And so in change enthusiasm, it's one who is inspired by those emotions, inspired by those signal emotions as a gift and an invitation to grow, to become better. So yeah, it's all about being in tune with this energy that I feel connects us all. We're all vibrations, right? And I think that this emotion, like I said, is an infinite well. And I think it's a way for that divine source to communicate with each and every one of us and signal us and bring our awareness to, hey, you about to learn, you about to grow.
Right.
It might be hard, it might be challenging, but I'm here to let you know I'm with you, and you can use all these vibrations as fuel to get about the business of growing. So yeah, it's hugely important.
I love that too. And when you said that about this is an infinite, I never looked at it that way until I heard you say that, or read it about your material, that this is an infinite resource. And I never looked at it that way. And it's absolutely true. And we spend so much time, energy, and resources and trying to get away from them. And I'm with you 100%. And I think I certainly learned this in the Marine Corps. I certainly learned this flying planes. And then as I've gone down this path and learned more from everybody else and learned about mindfulness, is that all of these are gifts. And so this gnawing in the stomach, the tightness in the throat, that's a barometer for me that I'm okay. Pay attention to this, because this is leading me to something significant. And if I work through this, something significant is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. There's something.
I
good
try
on the
to
other
remind.
side.
It's hard. I'm guilty of reacting. Getting in reactionary mode instead of that kind of outcome-based mindset mode that we're talking about here. But it's so important to live in that. And I learned that in the Marine Corps. Like, I remember, because he says, be the composed force in a chaotic situation. When I was going through the Marine Corps, and those officers said, your job is to be the composed force in this chaos. Let everybody else freak out, spend all their limited time, energy, and resources trying to put out fires. You walk calmly through the fire. Remember, fire can be warm. I remember that's what the instructors tell me. Fire can be warm.
It doesn't always burn you.
Just don't let it burn you, and don't bring gasoline to the fire.
Right.
But be the composed force in that fire. Let everybody else run around trying to put all the fires out. You can't put all the fires out, was his point. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, through that, it's not about ignoring. If you do have anger, if you do have some red hot passion, it's not ignoring that, letting it exist. But don't become that emotion. Don't let the anger be what's guiding you. The practice of this first step of change enthusiasm, the signal, it's broken down into 3 parts in the book, which is first recognizing the signal, right? Knowing how anxiety manifests through you. What does that look like? What are the, biological responses that happen when I'm feeling anxious, feeling frustration, and then exploring the meaning, right? I am feeling frustration, right? I'm starting to sweat a little bit. The hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Frustration is here. Let me think about why. and then think about kind of the thoughts that might be bringing your awareness to that emotion. Why is that being inspired? And then look for ways to begin transforming that energy through the power of choice. But yeah, the first thing is knowing how that manifests through you, and then exploring the why. Why is it there? So that you can be that calming part once you've worked through any anger or red hot passion that you might have.
What helped me when I was watching your TED, when you talked about that, you being a chemical engineer, you brought up that point, is like, energy can never be destroyed. It can either be
transformed.
Conserved. How did you put it? Conserved. What was the middle one?
Conserved.
Transformed, right. And so if we conserve it, that's the internal, that's not bad. That's where I get ulcers and I compartmentalize, and eventually it's going to blow up and it's going to come out in some negative way. If you transfer it, I'm just trying to put it off on somebody else, right? Am I getting that right? And then the transform part is
the venting. That's the venting. And honestly, I think that's our most natural response, is to transfer the energy and just vent about how terrible things are, how much it sucks. I think that's a natural tendency to do. In some respects, it's helpful because it lets to let out a little bit of the energy, but it's not sustainable, right? For those of us who like to vent, you probably find that you're venting a lot.
That's right.
Most days you're venting and the energy never really moves, right? It never really transforms, which is that final way to deal with the energy, which is transformation, right? Using the power of choice to transform anxiety into anticipation, transform fear into hope, transform anger into joy through choice.
How much of it is what I call compartmentalization? I mean, is that something that is that in the realm what we're talking about, like learning how to compartmentalize? I guess how I always viewed it.
A little, and I guess the watch out for that, because I'm one who does that as well. But for me, compartmentalization is dangerously close to conservation.
Exactly.
So I'm going to compartmentalize and then conserve all this energy that I'm feeling, all this frustration, all this anger right here in the workplace until I get home. And then I'm going to crack open a beer and I'm going to call somebody and I'm going to let this go. I'm going to open that compartment and I'm going to vent it all, right? So in some respects, there's a danger and a watch out there to make sure that doesn't entail conserving this energetic entities, your single emotions. But if you're doing it as a way to progress towards a certain focus, then I think that it could be quite a powerful tool, especially when you're experiencing this phenomena of change fatigue, right? When you got like 8 or 9, 10 different changes hitting you at once and you just become overwhelmed. I often tell folks, only deal with one at a time.
Right.
So put these other 8 over here, focus here. What are the 3 things I need to get done with this respective change today? Know what those are, and then move to the next. So that's how I think compartmentalization can be used as a tool. The watch out is just make sure you're not conserving energy in those compartments.
Yeah, I agree. I guess it comes from the pilot in me, where we're just like you said, how you just explained what there. That's how we handle emergencies, right? So you don't let all of it overwhelm you. You can compartmentalize and you prioritize like what's important. And you see that a lot in stressful situations. And an emergency happens and they're talking on the radio the first thing, and like what does that do? That talking on the radio doesn't do anything.
Right.
That doesn't right the airplane. It doesn't put the fire out in the engine, right? So don't do that first. Fly the airplane first, and then figure out where you're at. Then communicate. The whole aviate, navigate, communicate thing. But you're right. I always teach people in coaching to compartmentalize, but don't go home and beat the dog. Right? At some point, you gotta you gotta let it out in a healthy way somehow. And I guess that's the challenge. How do you open the compartment door and do it in a healthy way? But I guess the transformation part kind of does that simultaneously, right? When we're talking about transforming, it's like, hey, just recognizing that I'm frustrated, angry, scared, fearful, whatever. And then it's taking that time to just like, what does this mean? Because I think my weakness has always been when I've been overcome by this fear, anxiety, is I got to do something. And that doing something is holding onto the steering wheel too tight, or and it never ends well. Right. I overreact, I guess.
Yeah. One of the times when I was still working in corporate that I probably experienced the most acute signal emotions is after my second $1 billion acquisition experience.
Oh man.
And I got this new manager and I'd been with him for a couple months. And soon after the acquisition, they were cutting headcount, right? Driving down costs. I was a mid-level executive at the time, so it was a very uncertain time, right? So I was sitting with this new dude, and during a budget review, he's in my office, and he's like, Cassandra, I like you, and I want to keep you around, but I'm just not seeing a lot of value in having you in my organization in a couple of months.
Wow. Wow.
Man, I composed myself. I got through the rest of that conversation. But when he walked out, I quit what I was doing. I pulled up LinkedIn. I got out my resume. I was so panicked, right? And my mouth had gone dry. My hair was standing up on the back of my neck. Signal emotions.
Yeah.
Right? I was angry. I was fearful. And I recognized, my goodness, I am being invited into a huge moment of opportunity if I'm feeling this emotion this strongly. And when I thought about the thoughts, bringing my awareness to the emotions, it was, I'm not going to have a job. I'm going to be, not having a very prosperous career. My career's about to end. I was feeling shame that was going to happen. And I was thinking to myself, if those are the thoughts, how can I transform that and see this as an opportunity? Well, he's just given me 2 years to find another position, right? While he's still paying me. And in my mind, this is actually going to be a better position. And it's either going to be in this company, in a different organization, or in a completely different company. And so I started pursuing choices towards working in that company still, just in a different organization. And I ended up landing and creating my own position, one that was in a different org. And it was actually really well primed for advancement. And so to this day, I'm so grateful for him and to him for broaching that conversation and sharing that and inspiring those signal emotions, because it landed me in a much, much better position that I was more fulfilled in, and honestly, that leveraged my talents and gifts in a better way.
Yeah.
But I could have stayed in that panic and just spiraled into the downward spiral. But I chose not to.
And I even like in your story the authenticity of the supervisor who actually told you, hey, I don't know how, right now I don't know how I'm going to be able to find value, so that you could actually then do something, versus how often in a work environment or in a relationship do we not have somebody express that, and then all of a sudden, we're just fired, or that person just leaves our life or whatever, because there wasn't that healthy. I mean, it sounds like he was in a pretty healthy space of saying, ultimately, when I heard you say it was like, help me find a way to basically make you a positive part of our team, versus, hey, we're going to have to make some cuts and you're kind of on the bubble, so you may or may not be here right tomorrow, right? And so I'm like, that was very interesting. You
honestly, he didn't say it nearly as eloquently as he did. And sitting in that chair,
it was not near as right.
I didn't hear that.
You didn't hear that at all.
Values me.
Right.
He's just trying to find a different way, right?
Right.
I didn't hear that sitting in that chair.
Right. Right.
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20.
Of course.
But on that day and the way that he said it, it was very much so like,
of course,
I don't see any value in what you're bringing. We can have you around for a couple years, but after that, that's what I heard.
Right.
But again, sitting where I am today, it's like, I'm so grateful.
Yeah, because you took that and you did something with it, right? You made choices around it.
There you go.
Right?
Something struck me about, and I love that story, but the fact that you took a moment to pause after that kind of gross message. You took that moment to pause, and then the moment you did that, the choice to pause, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I was thinking that earlier.
That is almost 80% of the battle, I think. And I don't know.
Yes.
And when people say, I don't know what to do next, just by doing that, you've done the bulk of the work. You've started the wheels in motion. And now, even at that moment, you didn't know how it was going to end up, but at least you started it. And I think to me, that's very empowering, or at least it lifts a lot of burden off my shoulders. So I'm listening to this going, well, I don't know what to do next, because I think we want to have everything lined up in this linear plan, and that's not how you look at it. It's like, just do the choice, stop the reaction, stop the anxiety, stop reacting to the anxiety, and start thinking of outcomes, right?
Yeah, and definitely,
it's the biggest part, and probably the most difficult part of putting this mindset into practice. It's moving from the signal emotion step to the opportunity step, weighing out options. That is the most difficult transition to make when you're practicing this.
Yeah.
And I think that pause is so important in there, because that's kind of the reset, right? I mean, I think that's and sometimes I think people, I think it's a balance, right? You can't get stuck in non-action for a long period of time, but also you don't want to react to something either, because, I've done that a million times in my life where somebody says something and I'll react to their, whatever they say, and then that always goes just super great. But the, but
it always goes super great.
Right, exactly. Yes, that never causes any issues with my work life or my marriage or my kids or anything. Never.
But it's always the best.
It's always the best. But yeah, kind of for me, that is something I've worked on daily, is trying to do. I kind of look at it as that, I call it the 7-second delay, like on live TV, I guess. And I think the Olympic athlete the other day swore on TV, and they had the opportunity to bleep him out because they have 7-second lead. So I always look at it as if I can just buy myself 7 seconds here to just pause versus react, then I have a better shot at having a positive outcome versus the negative outcome I was about to have. And so I think, but there's a balance. You don't want to get stuck in indecision either, right? But there's definitely always that space of just contemplation, reflection, or it's just okay to be uncomfortable with that emotion, right? It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be angry. It's just okay. I don't need to move it into something else, because when I do, I'm just trying to alleviate the anxiety. I'm not being productive. I'm actually going to be counterproductive in that moment, right?
Yeah. And just to be fair, right? So back then, I wasn't nearly as evolved as I am. I wish I could have done all that in 7 seconds. But I got up. I left the office.
Yes.
I went to a coffee house and
right.
had to journal. And I stepped away for about 30 minutes to give myself some space. But obviously it's a practice. The more that you can practice it, the more in tune and able you'll be to create that space so that you can recognize that emotion. And what I say is step outside of it and view it objectively as this gift that's signaling you, and then understand how are you going to maximize the opportunity, because it's here. I'm going to grow. I'm going to learn. How am I going to do that?
Yeah.
And so where do you see people get stuck, and then what advice do you give them, or how do you coach them out of that, as you're talking about the signaling and looking at the emotion and being objective about it? I mean, kind of how do you see people get stuck? I'm sure I get stuck myself. So how do you kind of coach them? I think, how do you coach people out of that?
Yeah, so mostly what I see in my work, as well as what I experienced, and getting stuck is in that mental downward spiral or in that venting each and every day, where you're not really transforming the energy. You're just moving it around like a hot potato to anyone that'll listen to you. And it kind of stays the same energetic signature around you. And so the biggest part, and like I said, the most difficult part, is recognizing that emotion that's there and then stepping outside of it and understanding what are these thoughts that are bringing my awareness to it. And I like to put pen to paper, right? I like to create a chart, and you'll see these as exercises in the book where you list out, these are the emotions that I'm feeling. Okay, I am fearful and I am so angry at this dude. And then I think about what is driving that anger? And I list out all the thoughts, And then in that final column is, okay, knowing that I'm thinking this, how can I begin transforming this fear into hope? Knowing that they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. And it's up to me. What happens in between is belief, perspective, and choice. So how can I start choosing that will get me closer to hope versus fear? And it's like I said, mindfulness. It's that mental exercise of, here are the thoughts that are bringing my attention to this awful feeling that I wake up with each and every day. Here are some options that I have to begin moving that energetic signature, to begin transforming that signature. And like I said, that's one of the main reasons why I wrote the book, is because I saw so many clients, so many people, employees and workforces stuck in the downward spiral, stuck in this is terrible, this sucks. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to leave and go where the grass is greener, where the grass is rarely ever greener. At least in my own personal experience, and giving them the tools and the exercises to work out of that spiral and actually to begin transforming that energy.
I love it.
Yeah, I do too. Really helpful.
Yeah, we've been 45 minutes we've been talking. So much good stuff.
A lot of stuff. A lot of good stuff.
A lot of stuff.
As we kind of wrap up here, what we didn't touch upon, what does the book say about as a leader, if I'm leading an organization, leading a team through this, because now I got to do, not only do I have to manage myself and manage the emotions like we're talking about, I got to be
help manage others,
others, and be cognizant and aware at the same time. It's like changing a flat tire while I'm driving 60 miles down the road. Right?
Yeah.
How do we do that? What are some of the things that you provide in the book for the leaders that are going through this?
So I lay out 6 what I call softer skills that really take into account that energy, that emotion that's churning around the organization. And they are communicative. So thinking about how you show up as a leader, the way that you're communicating both verbally as well as your body language, how that looks to your employees and your organizations, making sure that you are relaying and succinctly communicating, how the change is going to impact them, as well as maybe even inviting input into kind of the vision and that change. Next is about being hungry. And this is about self-development and nurturing yourself. And this is probably the area that is the weakest amongst the most rock star leaders around the world.
100%.
We want our organizations and our teams to thrive, to grow, to be successful. And we get all of our energy and attention into them. And we forget about this person that we rely on the most in our lives. And that's us.
For sure.
Right? And so taking time for yourself, giving back to yourself, respite, whether that's yoga, exercising, journaling, as well as just mastering your own, skills, right? Your strengths, as well as your opportunity areas. So critical when you're leading through complex change. The next is authentic, right? Being your full authentic self. I feel everyone is where they're at right now in the world for a reason, to bring their experience, their background, their style, their pizzazz into what they do. And of course that accounts for you as well. I can tell y'all are in y'all's lane. What you're supposed to be doing, and it's great. And then also not rigid, being agile, being flexible as things change in the execution of a change. Gratitude, being grateful, sharing appreciation for those leading through the change, as well as empathy. And empathy I'm finding to be one of the most powerful tools when you're leading through high emotional type change and disruption. Just allowing employees to know that they're not alone, and having that time where you're holding space for them to emote and share how they're managing through the change. So those are the 6 that I walk through. There are exercises paired with all of them on really putting this into practice in the day-to-day, because I really want this book to be not a concept or conceptual, but more of a practical application, right? Of course, the concepts are shared, but then immediately paired with ways to put it into practice in your day-to-day.
Love it.
I love it, man. You're a breath of fresh air, Cassandra.
Definitely.
And
I appreciate you. You too as well.
And I love your common sense, practical approach, everything. It's not Pollyannish. That's what I really appreciate your stuff. It's not Pollyannish, like you said. It's like, hey, do this, and everything's going to be
sunshine
rosy.
and rainbows.
No, there's some work to be done here. Let's get gritty. Let's get grimy. Let's get down with it so we can affect this change. But that's the edge of life. I think that's how it's supposed to be lived, right? We can't avoid these change things. It's going to happen. And how we pull ourselves out of the mud, to me, is the magic moment. And what you're teaching, Cassandra, helps us get ourselves out of the mud. I love it.
Yeah, I do too. Very, very impactful stuff.
How can people reach out to you, learn more about you in the book, Change Enthusiasm? How can people connect with you?
Easy. If you're interested in the book, go to changeenthusiasmbook.com. You can sign up to receive a free download of the first chapter today. So go ahead and get signed up at changeenthusiasmbook.com. If you want to partner with me, work with me, learn more about what I do with my clients all around the world, go to CassandraWorthy.com, shoot a request, and let's talk. You can get on the calendar and let's talk.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Did we cover? I mean, there's more we could cover, but
yeah, that's great.
Did we cover enough? Yeah. There's always more to explore.
There's always more to explore. Well, we could just do the workshop. That's what we could do. We could just do the workshop. Let's just do the workshop right now.
Next step.
I've got some stuff. We'll go take 3 more hours here, and we'll get it all figured out. Right?
So tell me, how do you feel? How do you feel?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I feel like I'm in a better space because
yes,
we spent almost an hour with you. So I appreciate
you
you coming on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me, gentlemen. To all the listeners, thanks for tuning in. I certainly hope that you found some value in this, and I hope that we can connect down the road.
For sure.
Yes, thank you for shining your light.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Next Level Method podcast. If you found some value in this, tell somebody about the show. Tell your friends, tell your spouse, tell your kids, let them know all about Next Level Method. And go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more and join our community. Thanks for tuning in.